Hi, I'm Peggy Oliveira. Thanks so much for joining me today. I had a question from YouTube or from somebody on YouTube about validation, and it was in response to one of the videos I did where I talked about the importance of validation and the need for validation. And first of all, thank you so much for asking the question. I really appreciate you taking the time to do that and putting yourself out there by asking the question in the first place. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what it is and why we need it and how it helps. At least that's the plan. First of all, validation has a few different meanings, and I actually looked it up online to see what the official definitions were. And there's a few different ones, but for the purposes of why I think it's important and what it means in the context of healing from sexual abuse, is there's two different parts to it. And one is to support or corroborate. And then the other one is to recognize, establish, or illustrate the worthiness or legitimacy of. And both of those are what validation in this context really means. When you are sexually, or when you're abused as a child, but especially sexual abuse, because it tends to be kept secret and there's no necessarily outward signs of abuse. It's held in, you typically don't talk about it. You sometimes try to pretend it didn't really happen. You tell yourself it's not a big deal. But when all of that happens and you use your coping mechanisms to help you cope with it, to survive it, you tell yourself, maybe it didn't really happen. Maybe it's really not that bad. You didn't mean to hurt me. I deserved it. I was bad. You make up these reasons or excuses as to why it's happening. And ultimately, it's usually about you, and it has something to do with you deserving it in some way or another. But in doing that, you deny to yourself, most significantly, the significance of what you've experienced, the reality of what that means. But ultimately, when you deny, in whatever way you do, the significance of the impact or the significance of the fact that it's happening to you, you separate yourself from the abuse. So all of the struggles that you have end up being thought of as it's just who you are. It's just your personality. It's just your screwed up life. It's just whatever it might be, but you take that on as it's just a part of who you are, through really invalidating the significance of your experience. So in regards to validation in healing, the reason that it's so incredibly important is because without that validation from yourself, as well as at least another person, is that you're able to continue to tell yourself it's not a big deal. It didn't really mean anything. It didn't happen. I shouldn't be affected by it. It shouldn't bother me. It was a long time ago. I should just let it go. Those are all the things that you do to dismiss or really invalidate the significance of the situation and the circumstance and the abuse and everything that entails. So validation is really about honoring the traumatic experiences that you've had, and not necessarily just the abuse itself, but the aftermath of the abuse. You know, we would never think to tell a returning soldier who lost his or her entire group of people that they were with and lost limbs themselves, we would never think of them coming back and saying to them, you know, that was in the past, you should just let it go. Or, well, you know, it was an accident. Nobody really meant to hurt you. We would never do that because it doesn't matter. And it's completely invalidating. It completely says to them, you know what? Yeah, that sucks for you, but it's over. Get over it. We would never do that because that's not the reality. It's a horrible thing to experience, and If people pretend it's not, then you're left feeling like, well, why am I feeling this way? Why am I struggling so much if it's not that big of a deal? So whether other people are invalidating you or not, you are. Every time you tell yourself it shouldn't bother me, every time you say to yourself, it was a long time ago, I should be over it, every time you say to yourself, he didn't mean to do it, or excusing it, he was a drunk, or whatever it is, every time that you do that, you invalidate what you experienced. So validation is about honoring the pain, the betrayal, the loss, the childhood that you've experienced. And healing requires that you honor that, without any doubt. It requires that you honor that because you can't heal what you don't acknowledge needs healing. So how do you get it? Well, within yourself, you can't be in denial anymore. You have to be willing or able to really recognize that you're impacted. That what happened to you, whether it happened one time or it happened for years, that what happened to you mattered. In that moment that you were abused, your life changed. The freedom with which you lived your childhood, hopefully you did up to that point, the freedom with which you lived your childhood, meaning you just didn't have a care in the world, you were free to be you were free to explore and love and receive love. From the moment you were abused, that was no longer really the case. Being able to acknowledge that within yourself, while painful, it really can be pretty painful. But when you acknowledge what that really means to your life, to your childhood, you honor that little person, boy or girl, whatever you are, you honor that child by saying, it mattered. It shouldn't have happened. It wasn't your fault. In honoring that, in letting yourself, that child, know that, you're validating it. You're validating the reality, the significance of what that experience is. From other people, it's important as well, because within yourself, when you're just kind of thinking it and talking to yourself about it, it's easy to have those automatic thoughts immediately dismiss it. Like if you were to say to yourself, I was just a kid and nobody had a right to do that. There's likely going to be a part of yourself in the background saying, yeah, but you should have known better. Well, yeah, but you should have told. Yeah, but you should have said no. There's going to be a part of you back there that is telling you that maybe that's not really an accurate way to think about it. But that doesn't mean you shouldn't do it. You still need to do it. That's an important thing. When you can get validation from other people, it just helps reinforce that. The more you hear it, the more you begin to believe it. And that's true no matter what the circumstances. For some people, the only validation they get is from another therapist. From a therapist, from their therapist. Sometimes you can get it from a book. There's lots of great books. Courage to Heal, I would definitely recommend to anybody who has an abuse history or cares about somebody who has an abuse history. And through a book, you can get it by seeing yourself in some of the things that they talk about. Like when they talk about coping mechanisms or self-destructive behavior, you can see a connection there and think, oh, I do that too. Maybe it's because of that. Maybe there's a reason for it. It's not just that I'm crazy or bad. So you can get validation that way. You don't have to get it by telling everybody around you and having everybody like pity you. It's not about pity. It's just about honoring it. And one of my hopes and part of the purpose in having my website and being a therapist and doing these videos is to provide some validation, to help you recognize that what happened to you matters. It matters significantly. And you deserve to be able to move through that. And sometimes even just hearing somebody talk about it, something that you can connect to, can provide validation. So there's different ways that you can get it. You can do it yourself. You can do it through reading things, watching videos, even sometimes watching a movie or a television show where they talk about abuse. Can be validating. So there's lots of different ways to get validation available to you, but you also have to be open to it. So I encourage you to, when you hear somebody talk about, even if they're talking about somebody else, when you hear somebody talk about being sorry that that the other person experienced abuse, that can be directed to you too, because you deserve that empathy as well. And we all need empathy around different kinds of things at different times in our lives. If you share with somebody that you're abused, as long as they respond in an appropriate manner, there's validation in that. Now, obviously, if somebody responds in an unhealthy manner, an inappropriate manner, there's not going to be validation there. In fact, it's going to be an additional experience of invalidation, which children get very often. So that's not good. But there's lots of different ways to get validation, and we do need that in order to know that we are okay, and that what we've experienced is not okay, it was wrong, that it in no way, under any circumstance, was our fault. We need to know that, we need to hear that, we need to experience that so that we can begin to believe it. I hope that answers the question. If there's any other questions, if this brings up more questions about something, please feel free to let me know. I'm happy to have further discussion about this. Thanks for joining me, and I will look forward to seeing you next time.